up here, Tracy.
Hi, everybody. Good morning. So, we have seen a series of incidents and issues over the past year at the Office of Unified Communications. There have been a lot of efforts made to see improvements to the agency. Last year, I introduced emergency legislation to set up a daily dashboard that gave us insight into staffing ratios, that gave us insight into when errors took place. That has been established since last summer and has been live and is updated on a daily basis. As part of my legislation, SECUR DC, I expanded on that dashboard with a broader series of more granular information that we needed to see. How long people were waiting for calls to be answered, how long it took for not just a call to be picked up, but actual dispatch to arrive on the scene. That information we are waiting to be published on OUC's website. We are told that will happen at the start of the fiscal year, which is October 1st. But what's been made very clear to me this summer is that more needs to be done. More oversight needs to happen. And as my role as the chairwoman of the Council's Committee on Judiciary and Public Safety with oversight over the Office of Unified Communications, I am going to be very focused this fall on a robust oversight schedule. I'll be having oversight hearings every month, following up on those metrics that we need to see, especially around staffing, around errors, around delays, around geographic training, around pay. Also taking a deeper look into those incidents over the summer, getting to the bottom of what happened there, and making sure that our technology upgrades and improvements are where they need to go, especially given the multi-agency effort that is involved in some of our OUC 911 call center operations with OCTO and MPD and FEMS. And so it's going to take all of us to work together. I'm also introducing legislation that mandates the public release of after-action reports when incidents happen or there is a separation from protocol or an error that takes place, as well as the public release of the computer-aided dispatch reports. Again, we have to have a 911 call center that is filled with transparency, with accuracy, and with speed. DC residents and visitors deserve that. And I believe that with more robust oversight, with this new legislation, as well as with bi-weekly visits that I'll be conducting unannounced at OUC all fall to follow up on these metrics and make sure we keep moving in the right direction, are going to be important steps to get us where we need to go. I believe that this agency has what it takes to be the best 911 call center in the country. We need to stay focused on these improvements. There are hardworking call takers who are working every single day, committing their careers to public service and to being first responders. And my team and I are going to be focused every day on working with Director McGaffin and the entire staff here and the executive on ensuring that DC residents have what they deserve, which is a 911 call center that is fast, that is accurate, and that is transparent to the public. Happy to take any questions anyone may have.
Was the visit to your liking today, and was there anything in particular that stuck out that the agency can improve upon?
So my team and I just conducted another tour of OUC. We visited the FEMS training section, which is a really important improvement that they have, where people from FEMS are involved in the training to make sure that when an ambulance needs to be dispatched or the fire department needs to be dispatched, they're involved in that training. I did a couple of simulations of calls, and we talked about a very frustrating gap right now that we have with the FCC, that some of other service providers are not required yet to provide the most accurate geographic data. So that's something that we need the federal government's involvement on to speed up the enforcement deadline. Right now they have 2 years since January 2024. So that's another year and a half or so before enforcement happens. We need to have accurate geographic information when someone calls 911, and that's up to the service providers. We also need the federal government's involvement when it comes to designating our hardworking call takers as first responders, the same way our first responders, police and fire, are designated. So we talked about some of those improvements. I sat with a number of call takers as they answered calls and helped residents walk through their processes, and saw how PowerPhone, which is the new technology implemented, is working in practice. So it was a very productive tour. I'm still very worried about staffing and about 100% accuracy, and so we're going to be following those protocols that I laid out to make sure we continue to see improvements.
One last question for the time being. The 20 positions that had the $2,500 bonus, have they all been filled up at this point?
No. We have a vacancy challenge with the Office of Unified Communications. I put in my committee report this past budget that we need to see increase in pay. We provided $1 million extra to hire additional call taker positions, but we're still not seeing enough people come in the door. OUC is engaged in a number of recruitment efforts, but it's one thing to recruit someone and another thing to make sure that they pass all the background checks and the testing that they need to become a 911 call taker. And so that's one of the key metrics that we'll be looking at every week this fall to make sure that we fill those vacancies and get the agency fully staffed up.
You mentioned your new legislation that you're going to introduce. You've introduced legislation or had it passed last year where they're supposed to be transparent with their data. They have not always held up their end of the bargain with keeping that updated and including everything. What steps do you have in place when they don't hold up their end of the bargain or keep the data up to date or be as transparent as they've been ordered to be by law?
Mm-hmm. So the law that I introduced and passed last fall was around establishing this dashboard, which OUC has established and maintains on a daily basis. I think one of the most important things to keep in mind moving forward is how integral oversight is to this. Solutions aren't always built into a new law or a new idea. It also requires daily follow-up and oversight to make sure that the agency is, as you say, holding up their end of the bargain, following the law as implemented and as intended. And that's what these regular oversight hearings are going to help us do, to ask the same questions on the record, and these bi-weekly visits are going to allow us to do so that we can really make sure that all of the laws that my colleagues and I have passed are truly honored.
Can I follow up to that? I think the missing piece, right, is the call to dispatch time. They still haven't released that. They haven't said they plan to release that. You said by the start of the fiscal year. So how confident that's coming in the next 3 weeks?
Well, as you know, SECUR DC was passed and signed into law in March of 2024. And so I have been frustrated with the failure to implement that piece of the law that really provides upgraded and more granular information that the public deserves to have access to, especially around the time it takes for a call to come in and for dispatch to arrive. That's something my team and I have followed up with OUC on regularly throughout the spring and the summer. We are told by OUC that that is expected to be live by October 1st this year. We're going to hold them to that, but we're going to keep pushing them to make sure that that comes live and available to the public as soon as possible.
So in that same vein, what makes you confident then that they would release these after-action reports, which could be incredibly valuable for all of us to see, mostly the people who live and depend on the system in DC. But what makes you confident they'll follow that?
Well, I'm a person who believes that the law must be followed by every person, whether you're an agency of the District of Columbia or a resident. And so we're going to continue to uphold that value. But again, that's where oversight plays a really important role for those follow-up questions, for the public airing, to make sure that there is sufficient pressure on the agency to follow the law. When it comes to the after-action reports, I frankly think that there is a benefit for the public and a benefit for the agencies to have these reports be public. there are certain cases where an after action report comes forward and it is shared internally that lays out that the agency in fact did not make a mistake, but the public is still left in the dark about that. And so my hope is that this will be a collaborative effort with the executive, with the agency, to make sure that this law, yes, is around transparency, but that transparency is good for everyone.
And just to follow up on that, I'm sure you hear it from constituents. I just talked to a woman whose family member died in 2020 because she thought that there was an issue. Rightly or wrongly, there's a critique out there that this isn't being treated with the urgency that the citizens of the District of Columbia would demand. Introducing this legislation today, do you get that sense? I mean, we're talking about reports that you all haven't had yet. We're talking about hoping that we see these reports by October 1st. Just what do you say to citizens who think like the DC government is not holding up their end of the bargain collectively to make these fixes that have persisted for years?
Well, to those residents, I say I hear your concern and I share them. I share them deeply, and that's why I'm focused this fall on the Office of Unified Communications, not just on new legislation and new laws, although I think that transparency is very important, but also on rigorous, continuous oversight. Those monthly hearings allowing us to air these questions in the public and have the director on the record explain why and why not certain decisions have been made, explain where we are with filling these vacancy positions, visiting OUC every other week, making sure I'm talking not just to leadership but to staff about what they would like to see, what gaps that they've been experiencing, and doing so unannounced all leads to a more transparent and urgent process that frankly the public deserves. We are the nation's capital. We absolutely have to have a 911 call center that every resident and visitor can rely on, that when they pick up the phone and call 911, someone's going to pick up quickly, that they're going to get help. But be transparency if an error occurs, and I'm going to keep beating that drum. I'm going to keep working as hard as I can with our partners here and on the council to make sure that district residents get that urgency and those improvements that they deserve.
Where does your confidence stand right now in OUC's leadership?
Look, I work hard to work collaboratively and closely with all of the agency directors, particularly those who I have jurisdiction with in the Committee on Judiciary and Public Safety. I think there have been a number of steps that have taken place over the last year with OUC to lead to some improvements, but we've got to see more. And that's what this fall is going to be about. I plan to work very closely with Director McGaffin, with the mayor, with Deputy Mayor Pia, to make sure that these improvements are where we need to be, because we're hearing loud and clearly from district residents in all 8 wards. I hear so regularly from people that they are nervous about the call center, that they need improvements, and they want to see what's happening. And so I will take that call very seriously alongside them, and hope to have a collaborative partner with Director McGaffin as we do so.
So you are confident in their leadership right now?
I am hopeful that these steps that we're taking today, with the increased oversight, with increased visits and new legislation, will be important steps in seeing those improvements. So the oversight hearings will have different topics each month. All of them will be asking Director McGaffin to come to. It would be great to have Deputy Mayor Pia at all or some of them. As we look at what happened over the summer and the incidents and errors that we're looking at, I think it'll be important to have both the Director of OUC, the Deputy Mayor, perhaps the HCMA Director who coordinates these after action reports, as well as representatives from FEMS and MPD who have been involved to date some of these errors. As we get more into metrics, performance, hiring, that's really an OUC function. And then we'll be having a hearing specifically on technology issues and multi-agency coordination, where it will be especially important to have representatives from OCTO, the City Administrator's Office, and these other agencies.
Do you think that there's a hearing on how somewhere to go on OUC that would transfer dispatch responsibilities back to the fire department?
My oversight hearing schedule for OUC, as I laid out, is really more focused on improving the agency that we do have. I don't always think it is the best approach to break up an agency and try it with a completely new model that frankly the other dispatching agencies are not interested in exploring. And so that is an ongoing challenge for me as we figure out the best path forward. But of course that is an option if we don't see the improvements that district residents deserve.
And when you do that nuance visits, what specifically are you looking for? Are you looking for staff? Sort of, what's on your checklist when you go?
So first and foremost is around metrics, making sure that vacant positions that have been announced, that we've seen follow up from recruitment to hiring to someone actually accepting the offer to going through training and being in a seat. It's one thing to see those numbers at a macro level on a monthly basis, but to see them in practice in person is going to be really important. Another thing is to make sure that we have appropriate staff ratios. In July, we only had 13% of the shifts at OUC met minimum staffing ratios. That is not acceptable. And my hope is that by visiting more frequently and doing so unannounced, we'll see an accurate reflection of what's going on, but hopefully a more robust desire for folks to get in their seats and make sure that they're showing up to work. But then also an opportunity to speak more colloquially with staff, with people at every level of OUC. That's often sometimes when I get the best ideas for oversight is staff saying, hey, this happened, or hey, I didn't receive this geographic training that I was promised, so that we can follow up during the oversight hearings with what we learned at the visits.
How was staffing today?
Staffing looked good today. The floor was filled with people, and I always like to see that. The agency did know we were coming today, and so I think that's another reason why it's so important to do so unannounced.
And how cool are you with the $800 in bonus money being given to people to show up at work?
Well, my view is that OUC call takers are not paid enough. I think they should be paid more. I articulated that during performance oversight, during the budget. I wrote it in my committee report. It's why we added additional money to the budget for hiring. And we encourage the executive to think outside the box to get there. When I see $800 bonuses being given out to show up to work, to me that's the wrong message. You should be showing up to work because your salary is sufficient to show up to work. And it also makes me wonder, is there additional money in the agency that could be shifted just to baseline salary as opposed to a bonus? So I don't like the way that it was presented, but I do know that we have to pay these hardworking first responders more.
And finally, do you trust OUC to investigate itself when something goes wrong? Or did you at all contemplate in your proposed legislation letting OIG do it, letting someone else investigate their error?
So I think investigation requires some transparency. These after-action reports right now are really managed by HCMA. And one of the things that we included in the legislation is an opportunity for the dispatching agency to take a look at the report and have other inputs. So that's fire and EMS, that's our police, which is a really important part of this calculation, because sometimes, frankly, there's a difference of opinion of what went wrong and whose fault it is. This isn't about a blame game. This is about an earnest look into what went wrong so that we can have improvements.
Do you feel you have a willing...
I'm sorry, could you start again?
Are these visits happening for the two, or like under what conditions do you see them stop and will take their long?
Right now, as we look at the rest of the council period, my focus is on this fall, visiting frequently. My team and I will be here every other week. We're going to be doing oversight hearings every month and introducing and considering this legislation. I welcome other ideas that will make the agency stronger, and then we'll see where we are at the end of the calendar year. I think district residents deserve a sense of urgency, and they deserve our focus this fall on these improvements.
Do you feel you have willing partners in OUC and in the executive branch to work with council to put this out publicly and have a level of transparency that we haven't necessarily seen to a vociferous extent in the last couple of years?
Well, one thing I know about government is it works much better when we work together. I also know that the council has a very important oversight function. And so I plan to work collaboratively and closely with the executive and with Director McGaffin on these improvements. But I also know that district residents deserve a degree of transparency and follow-up. And so I hope that we continue to have a collaborative relationship when it comes to these improvements. I know the executive, like me, is hearing from residents across the District of Columbia with concerns, and I expect that they will be collaborative in our efforts to see the improvements that people need.
I was going to
One thing your build expertise is the city land forms, which I know a lot of us have been asking for. Curious, like, how do you think your bill will capture the full universe of space? Because I know that's sort of what a lot of people have been efforting in different ways to try to understand. I mean, from our understanding, the dashboard doesn't really account like for the full universe of the space. Are you expecting that your after action report is produced for every single estate? And if it doesn't, like how are you efforting to know that?
Right. It's such an important question because where we draw the line on an after-action report and public release is half the battle. Of course, we don't want to be so overly broad that we say for every call there's going to be an investigation. That wouldn't be a good use of staff time. But we also don't want to be so limited that we're not leading to the results that we need. So it will be flushed out more during the legislative process. Right now, we established the standard as an error and departure from protocol that leads to, and we have multiple prongs that has led to death or serious bodily injury, that led to a delay, that there's public interest in knowing what happened. And so there's a series of inputs that go into that calculation because, again, we want to get that balance right of ensuring that it's broad enough that we can see improvements, but not so overly broad that we are replacing the hard work that needs to happen in this building every single day with constant investigation.